completely open. Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
lovely. Awesome. We'll just give people a minute to join in. Aman, are you recording from your end? I'm having issues doing the recording. Okay, great. Ben, we're also recording this. So I believe Aman is turning them into podcast, perhaps. I'm not wrong.
Perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
happy to
yeah,
have you guys record and use it however you want.
lovely. Aman, shall we get started so that there's some activity as people are joining in?
Uh, Absolutely.
Thank you, Aman. So I'm really excited about this topic. I've always said that if there's one thing that we should change about our global education system, it's, obliterate exams and completely reinvent report cards. So today we're excited to be talking to Ben. Ben is outreach at the Mastery Transcript Consortium. So has 25 years of experience as an independent teacher. And Ben, we're really excited to be talking to you today. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you guys do at the Mastery Transcript and spreading some awareness about this amazing alternative that exists and isn't very much proven. So without further ado, Ben, could you tell us a little bit more about the Mastery Transcript, how it works, and what problem you're solving?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much to both of you. Raya, I know we've had a chance to chat a couple of times for letting me come on and share this, what I would describe as blue sky thinking about where education should be going. And Aman, I honestly very much loved and appreciated the way you framed one of the problems or maybe opportunities in schools is to think about what we measure. And I think that is in many ways at the core of what we're trying to do with the Mastery Transcript. There are, gosh, there's so many ways to try to describe our transcript, but maybe I'll start with the opportunity we see. You know, I think, problem is often a way we like to phrase things when we're developing products or new devices that might help us think differently. But I also always think it's important to frame the work we're doing at Mastery Transcript as an opportunity to serve our students better. So maybe if that's the problem is we're not serving our students as effectively as we could. And I think at its essence, if our belief as an organization is that in the US, where we started, and now we're a global consortium of 400 schools, with 21 countries represented. But our belief from the beginning has been there's a flaw in the way that schools operate around the globe for the most part, which is that their primary purpose seems to be to sort and rank students. And we actually think that the essence of schooling should be and schools should be to grow students. And we have come to the belief that it's the way we transcript and capture student growth in a very narrow framework that creates that dynamic, particularly over the last 100+ years or so. So I think in the broadest sense, maybe that's the problem we're trying to solve or the opportunity we're trying to create for schools.
Gotcha. And could you clarify how is it different? So, when you think of your traditional report card, how is the mastery transcript different than that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would always encourage everyone who's listening or listening to this later in different snippets to feel free to go to our website and get a visual because one thing I'll say is that it's very different. So I'll start with that. I share with people all the time that the mastery transcript is not a tweak. It's not a subtle adjustment to the way we capture student growth. More specifically, if our current transcript, which is fairly uniform across the globe, we often refer to it at the Mastery Transcript Consortium as the legacy transcript. So if the traditional legacy transcript is sorted by single subjects, it is generally a flat, sort of two-dimensional, single page uh, catalog of grades for courses that have very little definition. The grades are just sort of grades. There's no other commentary with it. The measurement, if I take Amon's words, of students is very limited and very narrow, specifically to traditional academic subjects areas like mathematics and science, world language, etc. Um, and the primary driver is time. The seat time, what's often called the Carnegie unit. A course runs for a set amount of time, and a student isn't really tracked for um, do they have the ability to fully grasp the material at hand. What they're measured on is do they have the ability to grasp the material at hand in a set amount of time. So that's what we think the current transcript does. Where the mastery transcript differs dramatically on the most simple level is that it's a ultimate transcripting report that does not have grades. It does not have a GPA, and it does not in any way sort and rank students in any way as a display as part of the transcript. Our transcript is digital. It's interactive, both for the student building it and for an end user. It gives credit not for seat time, sort of semester or trimester or year length courses, but it gives credit for mastery, for actually exhibiting the sense that you can do something. And whether that something is a content area like one, a skill like problem solving, and a broader disposition, what's often called social emotional learning outcomes like leadership or empathy, collaboration. Those are things that you can master. Our credits are not generally defined as single subjects. What we track are cross-disciplinary or even better interdisciplinary learning outcomes. Um, the school defines the rubrics or these competencies that we call them that students work towards. And in the broadest, I think, most significant sense, what we're really trying to do is allow schools to measure, to borrow your words again, Aman, to sort of beyond just traditional academic knowledge, that very narrow range, and expand what they prioritize to say they need to do with their students to prepare them for the world by looking at skills and critical thinking, communication, creativity, a lot of the things that businesses tell us are essential for success that schools, particularly K-12 schools, in our opinion, do a very poor job preparing students for. And we think they do a poor job because of what they prioritize as a measurement.
That's amazing. And for those of you who just joined us, we're speaking to Ben, who is a director of partnerships at the Mastery Transcript Consortium. They've reinvented report cards to measure transferable skills and to demonstrate a portfolio of projects rather than reduce learners to the arbitrary letter grade system that we have today. Now, Ben, I think one of the things that's really awesome about the Mastery Transcript Consortium is the acceptance that you guys have already gained amongst universities. And could you please speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that has been a very exciting piece of news for us in the last 12 months. And I wouldn't say it was unexpected, but I think it was unanticipated about how easily and quickly it seems the Mastery Transcript has been accepted as a viable tool for admissions in the U.S. College and university admissions process. For those who just joined in, I did mention earlier that we have 400 members from across 21 countries. The large majority are U.S. based, and at the moment, schools that are using the Mastery Transcript, the only schools that have sent the Mastery Transcript as part of a student's admissions profile have sent them to U.S. based schools. So I do want to point that out. But when we started this work 4 years ago, we thought, gosh, maybe 6 to 8 years from now, we'll have a transcript and we can throw a few to colleges and see what happens. We've been really sort of, I think, pleased with how quickly we've been able to develop this transcript model and put it to use. And if I was going to oversimplify the answer, we're very proud of the number 160. And 160 is the number of colleges and universities over the last 12 months that accepted a student into their university using a transcript, using only the Mastery Transcript as the sort of compilation of their high school record, meaning they did not receive a traditional transcript with letter grades and GPA and class rank. They simply received the Mastery Transcript from the school and were able to use that to make an admissions decision. And those schools range, you can find the list on our website if you go there under our higher ed tab. But if you go, you'll see that list ranges from two-year community colleges all the way up to Harvard and MIT and Caltech, and other schools of sort of state level flagship schools, regional universities. You name a category, we have found success with the Mastery Transcript.
That's amazing. I love that because for me, that just shows there's no excuses. There's no more excuses for reinventing education, adopting these innovative solutions because, that's one of the things people tend to fall back to is, oh, but universities haven't kept up their admissions. But actually, that's not true. You guys have proven that. And I'm curious, do you see any either regulatory support or regulatory challenges when it comes to reinventing report cards, when it comes to getting the Mastery Transcript adopted? Do you think that policy plays a role with this, and how is it affecting it right now?
So, yes, and policy will play a role at a couple of levels. One, I think, again, focused on the U.S. U.S. domestic schools first, but I know there's similar trends at countrywide levels with some of our member schools. One of the opportunities that the transcript opens up is the flexibility for schools to think very differently about how they design their courses and how they prioritize their learning outcome. One of the regulatory pieces, just to the way schools are designed, I know particularly in a lot of states in the U.S., for example, our teacher salaries or compensation packages are tied to seat time. they're tied to Carnegie units. And so if schools are going to now have situations where they have a report card that allows them to capture student growth, not only in the academic realm, but in these broader problem, skill based areas and disposition based areas, and they just redesign the way their school day functions or the way they get kids out into the community or value work that learning that might have nothing to do with school because it wasn't something that happened in a classroom, but it's learning a student can bring. There are challenges there that I think over time need to be addressed as this work continues to scale. There are certain states, and I know countries in some of the schools we work at, where there are national mandates that say, look, at the end of the year, your school needs to submit grades to the national governing body or the state governing body. So those are regulatory hurdles that need to be addressed. And I think, when you look specifically at colleges, there are going to be different challenges across the globe in different regions because different schools have different degrees to which they are holistic in their admissions process. So whether that's at a state level or a national level or a regional level, I think that the short answer, without getting into every single example, is yes. But that's one of the things we're looking forward to doing is continuing to partner with our members to figure out what lobbying work needs to happen to make those changes.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. In the Middle East, North, Africa region, MENA region in general, that's a huge challenge in many countries, including the UAE. You still have mandates for certain report cards and grades, which really inhibits a lot of innovation. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And I was just reading an article actually about how for the first time in a very long time in years, this year, university admissions, about 50% of universities in the US were test optional, which means that for the first time, young minds didn't have to take SATs for a lot of universities that they were applying to. However, what that meant was there was more of a reliance on the college admissions essay, which often, is correlated with income. So, the more you come from a wealthier background, the more support you have from your parents in writing those essays, the more
Mhm.
feedback you get on it, the more chances you're getting, admitted. And I think that's an argument to be made for models like the Mastery Transcript. Now, could you speak to about how the Mastery Transcript or, portfolio or skill-based report cards are actually more equitable?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you just framed there, Raya. It's one of the core principles behind our work. So mastery work, the art of shifting to sort of a mastery model as opposed to a time-based model of learning is that at its very core, when it's done correctly, mastery-based instruction is equity-based instruction. And you can find a lot of information about that if folks aren't familiar with an organization called the Aurora Institute, which is a US based but now international sort of leader in the work of competency based education. And the reason for that is by removing sort of the timestamp, which often correlates to socioeconomic advantages, meaning if you come in with certain background advantages, time may be much less of a problem for you in the way courses are organized than for other students who might start at a little bit more of a deficit. If you remove time as one of the drivers of learning, you not only create flexibility for students who might come in a little bit further behind, but and just need a little bit more time to get their base in place so they can start accelerating at their capabilities. But you actually, there's even equity to say some of the high flyers, some of the students who can go really quickly, who often get held back because they're just sort of languishing in a class, waiting for the semester to finish when their curiosity and interest and aptitude is such that they can even accelerate. They're also impacted in a way when you have a time-based model of education. So in the perfect mastery-based model, what you're essentially saying is we're going to continually try to meet every learner where they are. We're going to continually ask and expect them to grow, and that is going to happen throughout their school career, as opposed to just saying, there's 16 classes, you have this much time to take them, and we're going to measure them in that construct. So I think in every way, for every and all learners, this is, when you make a shift to a mastery model away from a time-based credit, seat time credit model, you are in fact empowering every learner.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you also explained the mastery model. I think it's one of those amazing alternative models that people don't realize exist. And there are schools, all around the world that have adopted it successfully. And I believe New Zealand is actually shifting its entire education system towards a mastery model. And we at
Mhm.
the School of Humanity have also, adopted the mastery model. I was wondering, how can people adopt this? So if there are, any educators listening to this, or any teachers listening to this, what is the steps to potentially adopting the mastery transcript?
Gosh, there's so many different ways to approach that depending on where your community. And I define that, I think, in the deepest sense of schools, parents, students, faculty, board, national government that you had mentioned earlier, where the current alignment is around an innovative approach to teaching. But the first thing I think, and most important thing you can do is message that this matters. Research organizations like us to just try to understand what's really required to make this change happen. One of the things we try to do as an organization is provide precisely that kind of assistance by having designed what we call a roadmap, basically a journey to mastery learning. And what we often say to folks is the two most important pieces at the beginning are getting folks to understand in your community why you should change. And that's not usually, one quick email. It's often sort of layers of conversations. And then once you've got buy-in from the majority of the community, long before you start sending mastery transcripts out, I think the next thing you do is once you have buy-in saying, hey, there's a different way to track student growth. There's a more effective way to assure learning outcomes for our kids. Then you take a hard look and say, well, what is it we really expect our kids to be able to do when they graduate? When they leave us? Like, what do we really say our kids can do when they walk across that stage and get the diploma? And then you need to look back and say, is our strategic direction, is our mission, our vision, or our K-12 or sort of profile of a graduate clearly articulating and aligned with what we think and say our kids can do when they go through our school? And once you have that alignment, then I think the ability to start designing specific programs around what kind of competency structure, what priorities you want to elevate and capture and measure and prioritize for students in your community, then that can happen. So the journey can be 6 months for really innovative minded schools that have been leaning into this conversation for a while, and it could be 6 to 10 years for very traditional schools that only have a few dreamers in their ranks who feel very strongly that they want to change the way their community's thinking about learning.
I love what you said there, and I want to go a little deeper into, this whole thing about changing narratives around education. And this is something we're grappling with as well at the School of Humanity. I think so much of anyone who tries to reinvent things, it's the biggest challenge is almost, a marketing slash educational challenge. It's raising awareness about such models, and allowing people to realize that there are different ways of doing things. What are some strategies that you found under that domain that work really well for you?
One strategy that I think is overarching is a patient, deliberate approach to informing people of this conversation. So that's sort of a mindset that I think has to come into this. That this is not a natural shift, and in general, the biggest challenge often with any type of school reform is it is the only business in the world that um, every single person has been an intern at. Like, I mean, if someone said they're reforming the banking industry, 95 to 98% of the population of the globe would say, "Great." Other than the fact that I have some money in a bank, I don't know much about it. But everyone has a very personal experience with learning, for good or for ill. So I think that's one thing you have to recognize, that there has to be some patience and deliberation to this. Um, and then I think you really want to, if I go back to almost how we started this after your introduction, is I really think it's important to choose language carefully. I really do often say that the mastery transcript is an opportunity to grow and improve upon what's already good in education, as opposed to saying there's a disastrous problem that exists in education, and we have to, and it's a crisis. And I want to expand on that a little bit. I don't frame it that way because I don't think there are problems in education. I think there are significant problems with resource funding, around equity and access, around expectations for students, around consistent quality, um, et cetera, et cetera. I think there are lots of things you can point to. The instructional model itself, obviously, I'm working for an organization that thinks that a more individualized, immersive, sort of project-based, personalized approach to learning would be better. So I see problems. But I also recognize, particularly in some of the more developed countries, that it is not an irrational position for someone to look back at the history of sort of the industrialized world over the last 50 to 75 years and say the standard of living has never been higher. The growth of business has never been greater. Um, I'm not seeing the problem. And I'm not suggesting you should or shouldn't subscribe to that position, but I think you have to be aware of it, that for some folks, the education system has worked. Or maybe they think sorting and ranking for the purpose of sort of future employment, or acceptance into graduate schools is, in fact, exactly what education should be. So I think, regardless of which audience you're talking to, I do think it's really important to frame this as an extension and growth upon some of the things that have worked well, but an opportunity to recognize that the world is changing, and I think maybe even you could say at this point has changed. The expectations for learners has changed. The technology available to think about how and when and where you learn has changed, and that we can now extend and do more with our institutions if we would think differently about some of the constructs, and in our case, the legacy transcript that holds schools back from working most effectively with their kids.
I love that. I think that's such an important reminder. I constantly go back between being patient and having a sense of urgency. The thing that and I think inspires a sense of urgency for me is, the fact that most students hate school and most students
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like their current report cards are measuring their worth. And I think that's what the Mastery Transcript does beautifully. It's a much more holistic and meaningful approach. My kind of last question to you before we open it up to our small and intimate audience here is, what are some of the common pushbacks that you guys get, and how do you respond to them?
So the most common pushback is the one that you identified right at the beginning, which is funny, like that everyone identifies is, what about college? So it doesn't matter the background of the school, the socioeconomic status, public, private, charter, where in the world. We joke at Master Transcript that is the one consistent primary question. You know, what does this mean for college admissions, and does it work? So we know that one of our roles in these early years is to slowly, thoughtfully, but aggressively, if those aren't contradictory, scale the mastery transcript. So at the end of last spring, we were able to say about 50 colleges, have accepted students using the mastery transcript, and it was a very limited and regional group based on the schools that were using it. We went from 4 schools to 12 schools in our membership actively using the mastery transcript as their transcript of record to send to colleges. And now we can say over 160 colleges and universities. And the list has not only expanded geographically, but it has expanded in the type of school that is accepting students. Next year, we're hoping, we don't actually want all 400 members to start using this right away, because that would be too many transcripts at once. I think that would become disruptive. But we're hoping for 18 to maybe 24 of our members to send it out, to see that college list jump from, maybe 160 to 250, maybe 300, have our first few international schools start to get in the mix, and then provide that type of response to the most common question, which is, well, it works. And I think the more we can say it works, and the more we can do it in a way where colleges aren't feeling put upon, they're having time to respond to a growing trend, the better off everyone will be.
That's amazing. Out of curiosity, is there any traction with colleges and universities outside of the United States?
So traction is probably the wrong word because I think the precursor to traction is action. Like in other words, someone has to apply to an international school, and we think we have two international schools in our consortium that are heavily considering putting the transcript to use next year with their seniors. Um, but I think at the moment they're planning on using it just for the seniors looking at US based schools. We have a couple of international members who are taking a longer view, and maybe this goes to an implementation strategy back to one of your earlier questions, which is they're going to start this in their middle years program and sort of look at this as a 5 to 6 year journey of transforming the way the school works. And so they've said to us, boy, in 2 or 3 years, we may want to start partnering on some outreach to the universities that a lot of our kids like to attend in Europe or the UK to start letting them know that a couple years down the road, these things are going to be the way you're going to get information about our students. And so, those are opportunities that we'll have, I think, down the road. But it's funny, the mastery transcript is interesting. Like we're maybe for those listening, and Raya, I know we've talked before. Like we don't really see ourselves as a vendor, like selling a transcript. We style ourselves as a partner in an educational thought conversation. But if there is one thing we sell, and I think it goes to this question around international universities or the regulatory piece you were speaking of, what I think we sell is courage. We basically say, look, we're going to provide a network for you so that bold, thoughtful, innovative leaders have the courage to strike out and push against some of the established norms to offer different and better solutions to helping students grow. And that's, I think, a role that we can sometimes play by just existing and having this option and having a consortium of schools that you can point to when you have those first tough conversations and someone says, what are you talking about? This is crazy. You can say, well, look at all these people doing it and talking about it and validating it.
Exactly. I think the best way to, show people it works is to actually have it work. And fair enough. I know there were a number of school leaders who were hoping to join this session but couldn't make it. So hopefully we'll make some introductions there. And for anyone who's listening, who has kind of a reach outside of the US, do help us take out the mastery transcript elsewhere in the world. I think it's one of the most impactful solutions coming out in the education space. So Aman, what would you like to do now? Shall we? I'm happy to keep the conversation going, but I don't mind opening it up to the audience as well if they have any questions for Ben or any comments.
Sure. it's a fascinating question and very deep. I think the way that we're trying to approach it is manyfold. Maybe is the best description I can give. If I think about specific curriculums for an example, we say very clearly to any and all schools that reach out, or state systems or districts that reach out to us, that we do not have an opinion on the IB curriculum. We do not have an opinion about the Montessori approach. We don't have an opinion about the AP curriculum. We have designed a transcript that is flexible enough to allow schools to design the model that they think is most appropriate, and just ask them to ultimately transcript and track their students' diploma requirement, their completion readiness in a mastery model. They can do that in a very traditional IB diploma program as long as their internal school graduation requirements track to a mastery model. The IB diploma is an external, scoring system and curriculum. So there's in our minds there's no conflict. A school could operate in a fully project-based, immersive, internship-based school without walls and still teach to mastery. One of the things that we've really tried to make very clear to schools is we are providing an option for how they capture and assess and measure their students' growth that is much broader, much more holistic, evidence-based, and is designed to capture learning everywhere it happens, not only where something is taught to a student in a classroom, but how a school chooses to balance that, how they choose to approach that, is really something we leave up to each and every individual school. And if you even get down to the classroom level, when I do speak to faculty, which is pretty common when a school is considering joining, because as both you and Raya have noted, this is not a sort of subtle step. It's a different direction. One of the things I answer all the time and explain all the time is, look, if you are in the early years going to maintain a relatively traditional structure of academic departments, we're not suggesting in any way that you don't give quizzes or tests or summative assessments at times, and run your traditional curriculum. Um, what we're saying is that the ultimate outcomes that the school is prioritizing that validate your ability to graduate are just no longer defined simply by your ability to have academic outcomes. That the school has taken the next step of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary learning outcomes that could and should incorporate a lot of what happens in class, um, but that you just don't rely or reduce the kids to a simple number or letter grade anymore. Um, so that's sort of one of the ways that we've tried to approach it, is by staying neutral. I mean, agnostic. I mean, we sort of say the same about standardized tests. Like, we don't have an opinion on the SAT or the ACT because they're not graduation requirements that schools have in place. They're external tests that schools may need to take, or that students may or may not choose to take in certain situations.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for setting this up, and Ben, thank you for introducing me to this topic. I mean, I'm just really just absorbing this. Um, I'm uh, I'm a PhD who's in management, who's been mostly in the upper, basically higher education side, like it's a K
Mm-hmm.
through. And so, one thing that strikes me about this whole conversation is how, in order to mainstream a mastery transcript, that it's going to be important to basically talk about the master who's teaching it. And the reason why I say that is what I'm finding, like through the courses, most of a traditional transcript will do is a little list in the college level. It lists like the name of the course, the registration number, and then maybe the name of the instructor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I found that to be insufficient. Like when it comes time to for me to, let's say, write a reference for one of my students, because I am quite explicitly, when I'm designing and teaching a course, thinking about the competencies that I'm giving the students and providing. All of a sudden, in the having to say, well, it's important for you to know who I am. you know, that
Mm-hmm.
this is my
Yep.
background, PhD in this, this, and this, and this, and this is what the competencies that the course was doing. and then I say, oh yeah, and then they got an A in it,
Yeah.
and then I can explain why. Even though this does cause some issues because, I wasn't always, let's necessarily accomplished at what I'm teaching, right? So what does this mean about when someone is on the transcript and your name doesn't mean anything yet because you were just beginning? But I guess my overall point, though, is I want to thank you for this conversation. But really, yeah, that's it seems to me that in order to mainstream this, that we need to find a way to bring that into the conversation, the master of the person who's instructing the course, as a way of signaling and talking about the competency that students are getting. So thanks.
Sure. I'll share a thought on that. I love the framework you put on that, and I'll explain, hopefully, actually, explain how we are trying to do precisely that at the individual school level, and why sort of the understanding of sort of the environment the student is learning in is vitally important to the success of the end user reviewing a mastery transcript. So in the transcript itself, and I don't know if this is the kind of thing you can poke around and find on our website. I don't know if we have this level of detail when you play with some of our models. But if you ever see me at a presentation or you ever have a chance to reach out to me, I'd happily show you. One of the things that we know is essential, and we'll align with exactly how you framed it, is in our transcript there is an embedded school profile link, because our transcript is digital, right? So it's read interactively. And we know from the end users, the college admissions officers, that is vitally important to support this shift, because they really want to understand, maybe not at the teacher specific level, but they want to understand at the school level, what is the school prioritizing? What is their approach to learning? Why is that approach to learning essential to meet the mission and vision of that institution? And therefore, how they should be paying attention to the growth of the student within this mastery construct, so that they can understand the context for the credits, the competencies that the school has defined and prioritize that the student is earning. So while that's not at the individual level that you're speaking about, what I would say to you, and as I heard when you were talking, is yes, that's precisely what we implore our member schools to do, very thoughtfully and carefully, as they begin to put the transcript to use. And we know from the end users at the admissions office side that is of utmost importance to understand the learning journey that the school is promoting and prioritizing.
Ben, I have a follow-up question there. It's a perspective I hadn't considered. You and your team speak to a lot of college admission offices. How do they feel about all of these changes? These, not just the mastery transcript, but this shift that we're all experiencing in the education space?
They feel lots of ways, and I mean that sincerely. There really is not one answer. Although, I guess I will say as a joke, early on, I in the early conversations with college admissions officers, when we were showing them how the transcript would function, I used to joke that no matter which part of the transcript they were referencing or what specific angle they were taking to an approach, what they were really asking was, hey, can you reduce that to a single number? So there is an element of comfort in the admissions office with, being able to count classes or reduce things to a number, or transcribe results into data points that might seem comfortable. They may concede they're not always the best way to capture a student's sort of performance or abilities, but they're comfortable, and they know those. So that's probably the one consistent thing we got from college admissions officers. But here's where I think the line is drawn, and I'll see if I can explain this well. I don't think I or anyone in our organization has ever spoken to someone about the mastery transcript in any depth and felt at the end of the conversation that the group or the individual didn't philosophically sort of understand what we were doing, appreciate what we were, and in most cases like what we. But here's, in my mind, the tipping point of this is true of admissions officers, because I've seen this in real time, of how they react to it in the broadest sense. Everyone goes through the introduction process and finishes with, oh, I get it. Our task as an organization and the task of our member schools is to take the group that goes, oh, I get it. I understand what you're doing. I like it. But then how do I fit it into what exists? What we need to do is get more and more people to say, oh, I get it. I like it. This is now an imperative. How do I make sure over time I switch the way we and our system operates so that more schools can do this? And that's ultimately, the spectrum of challenge in my mind for the Mastery Transcript. We met with a state system a couple months ago, and we had 6 deans of admissions from 6 of their different state universities. The first 5, all of them who were career admissions officers, all were examples of the first group. Oh yeah, thank you. This was very helpful. We get it. But how will it fit process X, Y, and Z? What do we need to do? What do we need to tweak? The 6th dean of admission in that state system had been an English teacher in a high school for 15 years before moving to the higher ed world of admissions. And he said, this is amazing. This is exactly what every single school should be doing. And I'm going to continue thinking and working with my colleagues here to figure out what we can do to make sure we can accommodate transcripts like this easily. So at the most basic level, that's kind of the epiphany that needs to happen, or the knowledge base that needs to be brought to this, I think, to move people to the side of the conversation of how do I make it work, not how do I make it fit what already exists.
That's amazing. And for those of you who just joined us, we're speaking to Ben, who is the Director of Partnerships at the Mastery Transcript Consortium. They're basically reinventing report cards by focusing on measuring transferable skills through a portfolio of projects. And it's open to the audience now, so feel free to, raise your hand and contribute. And Ben, do you have any stories to share with regards to the impact that you've seen, like, schools that have adopted it and any changes that they've seen within their students' body or the effects that it's had on learning?
So yes and no. So yes, in that the schools that have put the transcript to use had, in full transparency, in most cases had been engaged in conversations around a more innovative approach to teaching and learning, a mastery or competency model, prior to the MTC's existence. So as it won't surprise you, the early adopters, um, uh, you know, already had students who were feeling much more engaged. But within that, certainly even in the short term, we did a student panel recently, and it might even be posted on our website. We've done 2 of them, and both of them have been relatively unscripted. So we're sort of equally curious as to what the kids were going to say. But there's a lot of conversation about engagement. There's a great deal of conversation about an improved flexibility for how they can think about what classes they want to take, because they think skills that they might be really proud of or learning outcomes that they might be really proud of can now be presented in broader ways that don't maybe mandate them to sort of take an AP physics class because they feel like they're supposed to, but that maybe some of the skills and learning outcomes or attributes can be captured and displayed in different ways. But I did write down a quote actually from one of a conversation I recently had with a student, and I'll throw it out just for the consideration of the group. Obviously, if in a different setting, sometimes I put it in the chat for people to see. But one of the seniors from one of our sending schools this year, I was in a panel discussion with her and with folks in the state of Vermont, and one of the adults in the room, one of the teachers, I think, said, I've got to ask, is this extra work for you? If all of a sudden you're in charge of curating exemplars of your work into a transcript, if you're in charge of tracking not just which classes you're taking, but sort of what these higher order mastery or competency rubric based outcomes are, is it extra work? And this was her response. This is actually verbatim. She said, just thinking that it is a lot less stressful than a traditional transcript because young people are just being provided the opportunity to showcase themselves as a person. It's slightly stressful because someone will make decisions about you as a student based on your actual work, but it's empowering because you get to choose how to present yourself. So that may be the best quote of all, particularly the second half of how the majority of students react to having true ownership over not necessarily the outcome direction, because the school defines that, but where they want to put more or less time and energy in their pursuit, and ultimately the type of evidence they want to use to present themselves.
Thank you so much, guys. And I'm so sorry for appearing so late. I was actually on a Zoom call, with kids, teaching them about like how to do an interview. So that's kind of why I'm late. But yeah, so being that I'm just showing up, so just kind of, I know you guys probably said it already, but what exactly? So you said these new report cards would do, instead of like traditional, it would be more of like what, project based? Is it like ongoing assessments? Like what's the just so I can have a stronger idea?
Yeah, so basically what our report card does is it encourages schools to stop using traditional academic departments as the exclusive and primary way they track their students' growth through grades. Um, and instead, not get rid of departments, not say that there is no more place for academics in schools, but to say, look, a school's responsibility is to look at their mission, look at their vision, look at their strategic plan and direction, and ideally sort of design and then look at their profile of a graduate, essentially like what they say their kids can do when they walk across the stage, and then create what in the field of mastery education is called competency areas, what we at Mastery Transcript called mastery credit areas, but essentially buckets of growth that you want to prioritize for your students' journey. And these buckets can align with traditional content areas like science and STEM field or humanities work, where you're just tracking the ability to sort of wrestle with content that a certain school might think is essential, but also expands the way you track and measure student achievement into skill-based growth, problem solving, critical thinking, and or the third area we describe as dispositions, which is often called SEL growth. Essentially to say, look, we're going to elevate outcomes in all of those areas as graduation level requirements, not simply the very narrow range of your ability to regurgitate, a volume of content back to a teacher. But we're going to prioritize all of these areas as a way to more holistically capture the complex and unique individuals that we have the privilege to sort of grow and raise in our schools.
That sounds beautiful. Okay, so I kind of have a better idea now. So I'm thinking of, because I'm doing like a similar thing, and what you're talking about almost sounds like this notion of organic intelligence that I'm basically trying to coin. Um, and with organic intelligence is basically, sorry about this background. Sorry, I'm in the Bronx.
No, that's fine.
Don't
That's
put
fine.
cars like that around here. But yeah, like organic intelligence is about how, like, one of the main staples, and I'm actually writing the article right now, is like the ability to improvise. And that sounds very vague, but
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just thinking about, all right, let's say you're on a job interview, right? I'm just using the job interview since I just kind of came off of that, that seminar. But let's say you're on a job interview and a person hits you with something that you don't have the answer to, like you're not sure. Like I feel like being able to think on your feet is like a certain natural intelligence. That's a certain natural ability, and like kind of
Mm-hmm.
taking it a step further toward, all right, so how are we going to assess like this organic intelligence, natural intelligence? And I'm thinking about things like like performance, like skits, seeing people like put on a play, like how do you know how to, if you can act in a certain way that exemplifies that something, like I feel like that's much more rich than you, like as you said, like regurgitating answers on a page. So it's like, yeah, like these kind of hands-on interactive. I also think that, in terms of assessments, like I don't know if you guys would agree, but like I feel like ongoing rubric criteria assessments, I feel like would be more effective. Like so it's like, all right, this person, let's say the skill is interpersonal communications, right? All right. This person can convey their point effectively. Boom. Like that's one level. And then this person needs improvement, you know, and it's like just kind of setting it up like that. So is it kind of like, are you doing it? So would these new report cards kind of be like doing kind of measuring, not measuring, but performance, using performance indicators for less traveled fields of study, like interpersonal communications, maybe financial literacy? Because I know you did mention like whole child, like holistic kind of assessment.
Sure.
So yeah, like
Sure.
that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Like the things like, all right, so like let's say it's financial literacy. Okay, hey, here's this checkbook, balance it. Or hey, here's these stocks, try to like determine when this is gonna go down, or you know what I mean? Like something that's hands-on
Yeah.
actual project. So
Well,
is this kind of like the vein you're talking about?
absolutely. And what we're basically saying, so if you take your, improvisation, right, as a trait that you say, look, at our school, we've decided that this is something our kids have to be able to do. So you can have a rubric defined competency outcome that says, there's an improvisation credit. And basically, it means a student has exhibited multiple instances of being able to think on their feet, react to unexpected data points, present themselves or their position in a way that reflects a nimble approach to thinking and learning. I'm sort of making that up on the fly, but that would be something like that would be the competency. And then you would hold kids accountable to that in a way that says, look, maybe you do exhibit that in a playwriting class, but maybe you exhibit that in a job interview and you come back with a story because you get a letter of recommendation from the job, the employer who says, this was the most amazing interview I ever had because here's a question I asked and here's what the student did. What you're essentially saying is we're going to define a skill. And it could be a content skill. I want to be clear. It could be, hey, you need to be able to write a 3-paragraph, analytical essay. I mean, that could be it as well. Or you need to master the works of Jane Eyre. I mean, schools get to choose what they want to prioritize. There is no one central curriculum. And then you write rubric defined sort of competency based outcomes that you say to the students, you have to show this. You have to prove that you can do this. And you can do it in lots of different places and ways, both in school and out of school. But we are either going to mandate that we see this, in which case we call those in our transcript foundational credits, meaning that you have to earn those to get a diploma. Or you might say, we're going to place this improvisation skill at a non-required level because we don't think that should prevent you from graduating, but we actually want to recognize it. Like if you're good at this, we want to give you what we would call advanced credit, and we want that to be on the transcript. And we want people to see that we think this is a unique, special skill that you have that we think has great value to the point that we've prioritized it as a transcript level outcome. And so that is really the beauty. And it's to say, look, schools get to pick how they want to approach that and where they want those priority points to be. Um, but that, yes, if you are at an institution that says that is vitally important, then you get to prioritize that. I would broadly, another term that you probably come across, Robert, that I would encourage you to think about with your research is, oversimplified as, the current, it's a strengths-based approach to learning. Where do you have strengths? Let's
Yeah.
make sure we capture and recognize those as opposed to the current, reductionist model that basically says we're going to pick a very small handful of winners and then varying degrees of losers as we go down the chain.
Yes, strengths-based model. That's literally, I've got a list of different factors or different qualities that this whole curriculum is going to have, and strengths-based model is literally there, like viewing students for what they can do,
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you were saying. Like I'm thinking, all right, so if there's a certain defined competency, right? Let's say again, it's financial literacy, boom, like that's it. Um, so would the students then be able to? Because I always like one of the things that I'm going to have as a part of my curriculum, mind you guys, I don't subscribe fully to child-centered learning, just for the simple fact that I mean, if you guys, there's a book called The Rediscovery of Teaching by Gert Biesta. Definitely read
Mm-hmm.
it if you're big on child-centered education. He's gonna flip your mind. Okay, that's a good read. And he basically makes the argument that like child-centered education, if you're focusing only on the student, then that's gonna make them egotistic, right? So I don't want to do only that. So, but I do want to ask, I do want to hear a little bit about the child's interest, kind of like in a Dewey fashion, right? So I want to hear about the child's interest. So let's say, boom, financial literacy is the skill that I want them to learn. Can they then choose which way to show what they know? For instance, can they choose to perform like on stage? Like they want to perform and act out their financial literacy? I don't know how they're going to do that, but we'll figure that out. Do they want to,
Right.
do you want to like, do you want to write it out? Do you want to do a test? Hey, maybe you want to do a test. Do you want to give a presentation on it? Do you want to speak? Do you want to public speak? Is that your skill? Or do you get what I mean? Do you want to make a movie on it? Like, do they have
Yeah,
options to showcase how they show what they know?
that's absolutely the design. And really one of the things that we say to schools is, the first level is writing your competencies. What are the categories? What are these buckets you want to prioritize? And then what are the rubric defined competencies, what we for our system call mastery credits that students either must or can earn in various areas. Outside of the transcript, we say, look, you need some sort of essentially like a course guide, that basically says, here are various ways you could exhibit this. And they're not exclusive. It's not to say these are the only ways you could exhibit this skill or this growth mindset, or this academic content growth. But it's some of the ways that we could see doing this, because yes, what you're looking for is evidence of learning, not evidence of I taught you something and you were directly in front of me and then you regurgitated it back in the precise way that I defined.
Right, exactly. Because that's not true learning. Because once they regurgitate it back, they're not remembering that unless they actually cared about the information. You
Mm-hmm.
know. So
It's thinking. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Apologize.
no worries.
Sure, thank you, Aman and Roya, for the space and for the room. It's always amazing to be part of such small discussions. You learn the most. And Ben, thank you for unloading avalanche of information at me. I need I need some time to absorb parts of it. And I'm amazed by the concept of master transcript. So the question is, I heard that you talked about skill-based learning, project-based learning, maybe a little bit of personalized learning. And it seems that this concept is relatively new compared to the system that we've been using since the last industrial revolution. So when it comes to teaching students, not necessarily high schoolers, I have a bias of, working on personalized learning for also adults and high schoolers and all the way, from pre-K to grade, as they say it. Now, with that, my question is, how could you empower or give the necessary tools to teachers to guide and coach and mentor students to pick up the skills that you talk about?
Yeah, so that of course is in many ways the crux of a lot of this. You've got to have faculty, mentors, teachers, whatever the right descriptor is for the group you're engaged with, who feel comfortable instructing students and encouraging learning in a different way. So part of it is patience in understanding that there is a dynamic shift in a true mastery model in which you don't just use cliches like, hey, you want to go from sage on the stage to guide on the side, you want to go from teacher to coach, but to really help folks have tangible steps to what a learning space, a traditional learning space might look like that is allowing for a more individualized, self-paced approach to instruction. That really, both provides the structure of the general expectations of outcomes, particularly in content areas, while also allowing for a flexibility of approach that doesn't become such a burden on the teacher that they said, well, I just went from teaching a class of 18 to being an individual tutor for 18 students, and I have no more time to do that. So I do think there are resources we can provide. There are organizations out there. We know a number of them that work very carefully to say, hey, we're going to help you with the actual in-class transformation, so that you can understand how you can restructure your learning environment to get more engagement out of the students, more self-direction out of the students, and in fact, allow yourself to have the time and bandwidth to meet people where they are. But part of that also comes, and I really mean this, in also just helping an individual or a teacher think very differently what it means to learn in a versus what it means to teach something. And I'll give you one very simple example that I think, there are a couple that I'll use, but I'll choose this one because I think in some ways it's the easiest. There are many schools, and I think this is true at colleges and universities as well, not just K-12 systems, where they might have a 3-year world language requirement, or a 2-year or 2-semester, 2-credit, whatever words you want to pick. But I'll use the high school model where they say, to get a diploma at our high school, you have to take 3 years of a world language. And we all don't think much about that, to be quite frank. We're just like, yeah, that sounds good. World language is a good thing, or great. But what a mastery model encourages you to do when you're really thinking about learning versus seat time is to say, well, what are we really doing that for? And there are probably two possible answers to that. One is the school thinks it's so vitally important that a student engage actively in learning a world language all the time throughout their 4 years of high school that they expect them to be doing that for 75% of their time. That's a very good reason, if that's a core principle, to say it doesn't matter what level you're at. We want you thinking in multiple languages, and so you have to do that. But I think for most schools, what they really mean with a 3-year world language requirement is this. When you graduate from our school, we expect you to be fluent in 2 or more world languages. And the reason I say 2 or more is if I assume that it's a US-based high school, they're basically expecting that you are fluent in 2 or more world languages at, let's say, the 6th grade level. I'll make the bar really low. That's what they really want. And if schools really thought about that, if a student was bilingual, from background, or a student had the opportunity to, let's say, be an expat, and move back to Washington D.C. after spending 5 years in Beijing, in their 3rd year of high school, the school wouldn't say to them, which happens all the time, I'd like to point out, well, I love it, Ali, that you're fluent in Mandarin, and we actually offer Mandarin here, but you're well beyond anything we offer. So we're just going to put you in Spanish 1 because, you have to get your 3-year world language requirement. What the school should say is, this is fantastic. You're already fluent in 2 or more world languages. If there's a way we can keep encouraging that, great. But if not, feel free to do something else with your time and energy, that's of interest to you. So those, I think, are examples of the way where if you shift in the mindset of the educators, like what it is they want the students to learn, and have them worry less about, is it their ultimately responsibility to track that, or is it their responsibility to help the students realize that in whatever capacity they can, the entire mindset of what I'm doing with my students can shift dramatically.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would love for you guys to redo this. I'm not sure if you have time for follow-up questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for even posing that question. an ideal mix would be, certainly you'd want some thought leaders, and that can be at sort of any stage of the education process, whether they're leading a particular department or building or school, or whether they're just willing to push the envelope in different ways of doing schools. But the other group that I think you'd want would be, principals, superintendents, presidents of schools and universities who are in a position to not only come away curious and potentially inspired about what's possible if we're willing to think differently and reprioritize learning over tracking of students and sorting of students, but also maybe have the ability to message to their communities in a way that this is the type of strategic engagement the school wants to engage with, and whether the ultimate outcome is an adoption of something like the Mastery Transcript or just a significant and sort of year over year exploration of teaching practices and learning outcomes, and how schools could be structured to think differently about what they're trying to do. Those are the people I think you'd want in the room. Uh, because that's really the mix that I think tends to find the most traction, with not just being inspired by what's possible, but being able to be in a position to potentially take action steps at a community or school-wide level.
Ben, I'd love to get your contact. I checked on your profile. I followed you. I know that you're brand new on Clubhouse, but I don't see your in your Instagram. Is there a way that you could provide me your Instagram? I'd love to collaborate.
Yeah, I will. I guess I'll try to update my profile. The other way to do it is, quite frankly, is if you really want to also reach out individually, and I'll share this so folks are listening, feel free to write it down. My email is Ryan, which is just my last name, at mastery.org. And our website is just mastery.org. So anyone who's listening or hears this later and would like to reach out to me to either continue a conversation or think about different ways to engage, or just go to the website, please feel free to do that, and explore as much as you want.
I
And
also want to add there, for those of you who are still grappling with the Mastery Transcript, on their website, mastery.org, there's a page called What We Do, and it has an excellent visual of how the Mastery Transcript works. So for me, that helped me make a lot of sense of it when I first heard of it. Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. I think this was such an enlightening conversation, not just around the Mastery Transcript, but this entire model of education that would support such a transcript, including, mastery-based learning, very similar to outcome-based learning, and this, entire shift of that colleges and universities are experiencing and changing how they evaluate learning and how they evaluate skills. I truly believe this is the future of education. I do believe that, I do hope that we live in a world where mastery transcripts, or transcripts that are focused on skills and portfolios, replace the current norm. So really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. No, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here today, and I love the questions that you asked and others asked, and just always appreciative of anyone curious to learn more.
Lovely.
see you guys.
Thank
All
you,
right. Bye,
everybody.
everyone.